Welcome to the Sooners 360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners 360. Each week, we catch you up on the latest in OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU football recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruiting analyst for Sooners 360. This podcast is now sponsored by Sooners 360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month, and there's also a free trial option, and that's where I'm posting all of my regular recruiting content. That link will also be in the podcast show notes. Finally, this podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family, every team, every topic, and everywhere. This is episode 93, News Drought About Over. So I want to apologize. I haven't been able to record as many pods lately. I've been traveling quite a bit. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you've been aware that I've had some family. I've had a death in the family that's impacted. It's heavily impacted my availability and the time I've had for recruiting. In addition, there just hasn't been a lot of 2025 news to really distract me from other stuff going on, and to be able to throw some energies into recruiting. So, as you can see, some of the other recruiting sites, the recruiting reporters have been gone for a couple of weeks on vacation. Take vacation when you can, and it's just been dead. There's not been really anything to discuss too much. So I apologize for not getting you a couple of podcasts every week, but there wasn't much news, and I've had some personal stuff sort of beyond my control, kind of impacting my schedule. So enough about all that. Let's jump into the recruiting news. So 2025 commitment update. No update. Still haven't gotten any new commitments, and nothing from 2026, which has surprised me a little bit. I thought OU had a little more momentum coming out of the Sooners Under the Stars. Obviously, there's a lot of players very interested in OU from the 2026 recruiting class, but no one's jumped on board. Maybe we're gonna have to wait for for the first SEC game with Tennessee, or maybe some home games for some players who've been to OU 3 or 4 times come back for a Sooner game, and maybe that will push them maybe over the top in terms of OU getting some more momentum started for 2026, which seems silly to say, but the 2026 class is really going to be the focus this fall. So we're going to jump first to the number one guy we've been tracking, the number one guy all OU recruiting sites talk about, and we're no different. No different from us. Let's give the Michael Fasusi update. I'm recording this late Wednesday night. It'll be up Thursday morning on the 15th. So we're a week away from the Michael Fasusi Fest starting. He's going to announce on the 21st. I don't believe I've seen an exact time yet. So depending upon that time, we will I'll hold this podcast on the Wednesday. We'll record next Wednesday, whatever his decision is, and I'll hold this podcast for that. So you'll have a fresh pod Thursday morning for your commute in with Michael Fasusi news. No sign that this is anything but an OU Texas battle. Again, I've been talking about that OU seemed to have grabbed a small marginal lead with Michael Fasusi coming out of the official visit stretch in June. His OU official visit in June, hosted by Daniel Ekinkimi, friend of the show. And basically his whole family in Norman again seemed to put OU in a good footing. He then had what can only be described as sort of an average visit to Austin. Texas sites weren't just like, oh, he had a great visit. Oh, we're in great shape. There was a little sign that they were like, well, the visit was good. Whereas the OU visit seemed to be, he was just clicking with Bill Biedenbaum, maybe the family being back on campus, maybe Mike just clicked with Daniel Akinkunmi. Daniel's a really social, great guy. He really understands his platform. Like, Daniel's very motivated. So maybe he just found sort of a kindred soul, so to speak, in terms of someone who he could really relate to, and maybe that helped the visit. Obviously, Jaden Hardy is in Norman. Jaden's having a great, he had a good spring, and he's having a good August camp from all reports. OU's loaded at safety, or I think we might be hearing more about him. I think next year is probably when we'll hear more about Jaden Hardy. So his teammate was there. OU has secured sort of a preferred walk-on package for his high school teammate, Shorin Hutton, the center guard prospect. So OU in June did a lot of good work with Fasusi, and it just seems like they were gaining some momentum. So what happened today? Well, the first thing is you're starting to see some Texas sites walking back their confidence level on getting Fasusi. Also, we're starting to see some forecasts for Texas pushing for an offensive tackle from, I believe, Georgia, although he lived in Iowa before, and he was an Iowa verbal, I believe. His name's Nick Brooks. He's from Grayson, Georgia. He's listed as 6'8", 380 on Rivals. I don't know if that number is right, but he's listed at 6'8", 340, 350 everywhere else. So he's a very large human being. So there's a sense that UT is pushing for him, competing with Georgia, USC, and a couple of others. So you could read into that this is UT's backup plan if they don't get Michael Fasusi, because UT's doesn't seem to be much of a factor for any other big tackles out there right now. And then an OU site, OU Insider, Brandon Drum for OU Insider, went ahead and put his forecast in for Michael Fasusi to OU. And that's going to have some ripple effect on that. If you want to know why Brandon Drum put that in there, I guess you need to either listen to their podcast or subscribe to their site. So again, my sources have been telling me that it's the Fasusi and OU. There was some, it was getting warmer and warmer. I hope I've kind of relayed that on the podcast over the last month. But it's still a week away, and there's still a chance, I think, for maybe A&M. If Texas is truly kind of like, we've made our big, I've heard rumors flying around that Texas, and from a source that Texas has put in their big NIL package. They've delivered it, and maybe it's not moved the needle. In addition, Josh McChristian on Sooner Scoop on one of their recent podcasts, he just got back from his vacation, and they just did a recruiting video on YouTube. He said that Fasusi has apparently been telling people, locally, that he knows where he's going. He's made the decision already. Now, obviously, he can change that decision and pull a DJ Hicks and right before announcing flip to somewhere else. But if you add up all the various pieces, OU sites starting to be more confident, Texas sites starting to, they're already starting to say that John, Turntine, the 2026 offensive tackle, is better than Fasusi. We didn't really want Fasusi. He's not worth it. He's overrated. That kind of stuff usually happens from Texas sites when they know they're losing a player. Not that OU fans are that different, but I think the OU sites are slightly better than that. But the Texas sites are, they're notorious for doing this kind of thing. Whether it's Orange Bloods or Inside Texas, they're just sort of notorious for, well, we didn't want that guy anyway. So what does this add up to? If you ask me today, I'd say it looks like OU's leading on Fasusi. Mike might have actually told a couple of people locally in Louisville that that OU leads, that he's thinking of choosing OU. That's some OU sources are probably getting that same information from Michael, Michael's saying, Yeah, I think I'm going to choose OU. Now, will he actually choose OU? We've been down this road before. OU led for Lamont Rogers, allegedly for the week leading up. And then he was deciding, I think, on Saturday. And then Wednesday, Mizzou had grabbed, or Friday, I can't remember which. Mizzou had grabbed the lead, sort of like at the last minute. So we'll see how this shakes out. But one way or the other, I'll be recording a podcast next Wednesday night, and we should know where Michael Fasusi is going, which will certainly give us some positive or negative guidance on where the rest of OU's O-line recruiting is going. So the other 5-star offensive tackle is Andrew Babalola. Stanford, Michigan, OU had seemed to be the threesome most in play for a while. Auburn is recruiting him, and Auburn's on this ridiculous printing money like it's, printing money from some secret machine somewhere. I mean, their NIL game with Hugh Freeze has just gone ridiculous. They're flipping guys left and right. So are they going to flip? Are they going to do they buy their way into the final sweepstakes with Babalola? Maybe. Where's Stanford? I kind of think if he was going to, personally, I think if he was going to choose Stanford, he would have already done it. So I think it's Michigan, maybe OU. Does OU fall off if they get Michael Fasusi? Because it looks like Babalola, who I thought was going to make an early August decision, is just pushing this off and pushing this off. So the longer he pushes it off, the more it might help OU, or he might simply be waiting to see other options out there. He could, of course, take, with the unlimited official visits, he could take a couple of official visits somewhere else. So someone who misses out on another offensive tackle could pull Andrew onto campus. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's always a possibility. So I would imagine he'll make an early September decision. And if I had to guess right now, I would say Michigan. But obviously, Sharon Moore is in some hot water. Michigan's in hot water. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe that uncertainty pushes Babalola to choose Stanford, or maybe it pushes him to choose the one place that's consistently kind of been home. OU will certainly take Andrew in their recruiting class. Anybody who says otherwise is kidding themselves. So we'll see what happens. But I kind of think if OU gets Fasusi, Babalola might go ahead and we might get a decision from him, and it might be Michigan. That's the way things sort of seem right now. But we'll have to see what Fasusi decides. Then the third player is Christian Jones, the linebacker from Nebraska. It's starting to look like an early September decision. I think he wants to kind of see how Nebraska's early start looks. If Nebraska's a bad early start, I think then maybe that leads to an end game of an OU verbal. If Nebraska's playing well, I could see him dragging this out further to see kind of how Nebraska looks. And what OU does at that point, I don't really know. So at this point, those are the only 3 2025 names in play. There are no new offers. There's nothing really trending on Twitter in terms of follows. There's no names being thrown around in terms of, well, OU's going to try and get this guy on campus. But, OU's so focused on August camp and getting ready for the season that I don't think we're going to hear anything new along those kind of lines until September. So I don't think, depending upon how these 3 guys end, and if some weird perfect world where they got all 3, I think OU just completely shuts down recruiting, short of something like Nate Roberts coming to an OU game and kind of getting caught up with watching his brother and the ability for his family to come to every, to easily come to every home game, gets kind of swept up in some sort of, well, maybe I don't want to leave Norman. Maybe I don't want to leave Oklahoma and something like that. But I'm just creating something out of nothing right now. There's no signs any of that is happening. So let's talk about the rankings and where OU is, where OU currently stands. I talked about re-ranking players in the last week's podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So where does OU stand currently as I'm recording this? So on 3, they're 15th. They've dropped all the way out of the top 10 down to 15. And it's hard to see how they're going to jump any higher. We'll see. But at 15th right now. They're solidly in the Rivals top 10. They're 8th. And at 247, they're 11th. Fairly close to the top 10 in terms of that number. They're 11th, they're just fractional points behind number 10. So let's project that OU somehow is able to, OU does get commitments from Fasusi and Jones in the next 30 days. So what does this mean? So on 247, that would put OU, and 247 has a calculator. I don't know why no one else has copied this, but props for 247 for creating it. For a recruitnik like me, it's an invaluable tool. So if OU was to get Fasusi and Jones, they would be in the 271 point range, which is historically, with some other upgrades to other verbals, which generally happen, OU tends to get some upgrades from their players due to their senior year evaluations. OU coaching staff doing a good job with evals and get some player bumps. I can see OU staying in the top 10, around 9 or 10 on 247. On Rivals, that would put OU close to like 2,600 points. And that would give OU, historically, that's about the number 7th class in the country. ESPN uses a subjective standard that has no real measurements to it. So I have no idea. I think if OU got Fasusi and Jones, probably 10 or 11, something like that. On 3, I can't replicate what they do. So it's hard for me to say. I would say Fasusi and Jones, with other movement going around, probably bumps OU up to like 13. But without some drastic movement from on 3 and 247 and how they're ranking the OU verbals, and they're the main outliers on most of the players, as you've heard them. If you've been watching my YouTube recruit commit videos, if you haven't, please go do that. Go to Sooners 360 on YouTube. You can hear me talking about the rankings of certain players where there's just these really bad outliers in terms of rankings. Darius Afalava's one, Amarian Robinson's another, where a couple of services are just way out in terms of their rankings. So without some of that help from both 247, ESPN, on 3, Rivals, the only thing we really need is them to evaluate Ryan Foji on his senior year and see where everything falls. And if everybody else is right, they should be moving Ryan Foji into the top 100 range. And that would give OU more points. And, there's a point total. There's a point total around 2,700 I think OU could hit if they get Fasusi and Jones. Put them really close to a top 5 class. The only rankings update we've recently had that helped was Rivals did some ranking updates, but they really only impacted 2 OU players drastically. They smashed and moved Amarian Robinson all the way up to number 34 in the nation. Of course, they've been saying he's the best safety in the country after their event, the 5-star challenge they had. So they really had to move him up. At that same event, Trent Wilson was also just fantastic. So they've moved him up into the top 100. He's now on the top 100 by 2 services. Disappointingly, no movement on Foji or Floyd Boucard. Going to have to wait for senior tape, I think, to make those changes. And Rivals will do that. 247 will do that based on senior tape. We've seen that before. On 3 is the real outlier. They never upgraded Eddie Pierre-Louis. They only upgraded Eugene Brooks after his All-Star game appearance. So they're the outlier in terms of where OU is with the rankings and where they'll fall. And why do I keep talking about this? Because, top 10 classes matter from a promotional standpoint. They're a key metric in being a playoff contender. Everyone will tell you that. And they're also just a key marketing piece. And for better or worse, On 3 has managed to push themselves above 247 as the stated ranking of choice by numerous media members and numerous media sources. So that's why you want to be in the top 10. When ESPN is showing on signing day the top 10 classes on their ticker, that matters. Recruits see that. It matters in promotion and marketing. I know that doesn't equal wins or losses, but it does equals attention from recruits in recruiting and on social media. Being in that On 3 top 10 list sadly matters. It just does from a promotional standpoint. So that's where OU is currently. Again, it's about 5 or 6 guys that OU just needs the services to sort of streamline, or, well, that's what's the right term I'm looking for. Just basically come to a middle ground on that. Floyd Boucard is a top 20 defensive tackle across the board. Amarian Robinson is a top 10, top 5 safety. Trent Wilson is a top 100 defensive tackle. Cortez Mills is a top 100 wide receiver. CJ Nixon is a top 100 jumbo athlete defensive end. So that's what OU needs, is for those guys to all sort of dump the outlier rankings and get closer to more of a consensus. And it's just silly that one service has a guy the 17th and the other one has him like at their position, and then the other one has him at like 65 or 70. It's just nonsense. So that's where we are. I'll be back this weekend with another podcast. Going to talk a little bit about OU's schedule coming up, some thoughts on the season, and some thoughts of how camp has been going and how the recruits have been doing, the 2024 class. How's it been going? Who's underrated? Who's been meeting their rankings? Things along those lines. A little bit of a kind of an open topic, kind of a mailbag if I was getting hundreds of letters from folks. But instead, I'll just I'll talk to some folks and come up with some topics. So that's everything for tonight. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to leave a rating. Please visit patreon.com/Sooners360817 to subscribe for more recruiting content on Patreon from Sooners 360. And that Patreon keeps this podcast going, keeps it free, and allows me to keep bringing you the content, the recruiting specific content that I hope you guys all enjoy. Thanks so much.